lengthening of days and warming of temperatures, right? Well, let's go ahead and go to God in prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks that you bring us together to sit under the teaching of your Holy Spirit. As we delve deeper into the book of Daniel, we ask that you would open our eyes to see the truth you reveal, and that truth may transform each and every one of us more and more into the image of your Son, to your glory. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, just a little recap, since we did have one Sunday in between with Ash Wednesday. We're looking at the book of Daniel. We began in the book of Daniel with the first chapter, and it was Daniel and his friends, and we saw God being revealed as the God who was in charge of the exile, if you remember. But not only was he in charge of the exile by handing his people over to King Nebuchadnezzar, he was with his people in the midst of exile. He answered their prayers. He kept them safe in the midst of that. And then in chapter 2, when we flowed into chapter 2, we got this dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, which showed us that God was a revealer of wisdom, of things that were to come. And what was revealed is that this God is not only in charge of the exile, but in charge and sovereign over all of human history. That all human history, every kingdom, was in God's control and in God's timing. And in the midst of that, we saw God again with his people, using his people to be a blessing to Nebuchadnezzar, to the Babylonian people. And in the midst of that, we saw God's people being promoted, being blessed, to be a blessing in the midst of that. But then in chapter 3, things kind of changed, and we began to see the tension between God's people and the people of Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. But in the midst of that, in the midst of the cruelty, in the midst of the fiery furnace, we see that our God is also a God who is a deliverer, a God who is stronger and over all the other gods. I think Nebuchadnezzar's question was, who's going to deliver you? What God is going to deliver you from me? And the answer was given to him in a way that he did not expect. The narratives that we've been looking at, if you look at the individual stories, they're not difficult stories to understand. There are simple stories that give us there's not a single story in the book of Daniel, if you just take one little episode and looked at it, there's not one story that you say, man, I can't come up with what's the main point, right? It's a simplistic, powerful story. But the true beauty of Daniel will actually come into focus when we see the overall picture that is painted by the whole structure of the book of Daniel. When we see that, that's when we'll see the true beauty, the true power of what's being proclaimed to the people of God who are in exile. Now, we can't get there yet because we still have quite a number of chapters to go. But in the midst of that, we are starting to, this week will be the last individual story. Then as we work our way back up, chapters 5, 6, and 7, we'll start seeing how they paired with the previous chapters before them. And you'll start getting a picture of this beautiful image and beautiful truth that God is revealing to his people, the original audience, and ultimately to us as well. But we can't see it yet. So we're going to get close. We're going to continue our way through these narratives. And if you remember, the flow's been like this. Chapter 1 of the book of Daniel introduced us to Daniel and his friends, and it tells us how they got from Israel to the king's court. Chapter 2, it shows us how Daniel becomes a top trusted aide to King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. And it also shows us at the end of this how Daniel and his friends get separated. Chapter 3 then showed us the rising tension between Babylon and God's people, namely Daniel's friends, and it illustrated God's power for God's glory and for his people even during their exile, right? So we see this narrative come through. So we see God blessing Babylon by handing God's people over to them in exile, blessing Babylon by using God's people to reveal God to their king. But then we see the switch last time, and we start to see the tension. right? We start to see this tension. All humanity, the biggest problem's always been what? We don't want to just be like God, we want to be God. And that's what we began to see. Who can deliver you from me? Right? And God still showed that. Well, today, chapter 4 is going to be the last of Nebuchadnezzar's narratives in the book of Daniel. He's played a huge part of this. We're going to review a little bit of that as we go through it. But this will be the last narrative that Nebuchadnezzar is in here in the book of Daniel. And it illustrates both God's sovereign power, sovereign rule over Nebuchadnezzar, but also God's grace towards the king. If you were just to read chapter 4 on its own, all by itself, not in connection with anything else, the message would be simple. You would just title it, The Humbling of King Nebuchadnezzar. And you would be right. You would get the point of that, right? That would be a significant point. But as we will see as we get further along in our study, this is just a small piece to the bigger truth that God is revealing. And so let's jump into Daniel chapter 4 today. And before we do, there's some literary issues that we'll have to talk about with chapter 4. First off, there is what's called, and you'll see in some of your notes or commentaries or study Bibles, the prayer of Nabonidus. That's the way I'm going to say it today. Might not be the same way I say it next week, but that's how I'm going to say it today. Nabonidus, right? Nabonidus was actually the last king of the Babylonian Empire. In the caves of Qumran, in cave number 4 to be exact, there was some scraps found that was entitled The Prayer of Nabonidus, and it has some similarities to what we find, to the story we find here in Daniel chapter 4, where the king was sick for 7 years. One of the Jewish exile seers comes and explains it, and then after 7 years, the king is made well again. So there's some similarities to the story of Daniel chapter 4. But there's also some major differences to that. It's a lot shorter. Daniel is not named. It takes place in an area called Timon. Timon's a place where Nabonidus goes to worship the sun god, the moon god. He's worshipped there. He stays there a long time. We'll talk about that next week for sure. But that's where that story takes place, not in Babylon. And Nabonidus does not rule very long. He has, I think, about a 17-year reign versus 43-year reign for Nebuchadnezzar. And so once this story these fragments were found, and again, they're fragments, so you don't have a full thing. It's kind of piecing together. Some scholars and some people would say, well, this story of Nabonidus was just applied by the Jewish exiles, applied to a more important king, Nebuchadnezzar. It didn't take place with Nebuchadnezzar. It was just applied to him to give it more authority. So that's what some people would say. The other reason they would say that is because Nebuchadnezzar is the most documented king. We have, in almost all of antiquity, we have all kinds of documents for Nebuchadnezzar. And remember the type of person that Nebuchadnezzar was, right? He wanted all of his successes documented, right? And he's going to make sure they're documented. All the military triumphs, all his building projects, all of those things would be documented. And we have a lot of documents from Nebuchadnezzar, but there's a document gap in his reign. There's a lot of documents at the beginning of his reign, which would make sense when all the wars are taking place, when all the buildings are taking place. But then there's limited documentation that has been found in the 570s BC. But then in years 37 through 43, starting about 568 BC to the end of his reign, the documents surge again. So some people would say, one side would say, well, because we don't have this illness documented in extra biblical sources with King Nebuchadnezzar, it probably didn't happen to him. Others would say, well, no, this document gap makes perfect sense. Right? We have all the successes documented. during this time where he's insane and out of his mind, he's not in charge. We don't have the documentation there. When his reason returns, then we start seeing the documents pick up again. We do have some evidence in antiquity from historian Eusebius, who quotes Abonitis from the 2nd century BC, who talks on the authority of Megasthenes from the 3rd century BC, that talks about an illness with King Nebuchadnezzar on the roof. It says he's on the king's roof, the palace roof, and he's possessed by a god, is what this extra source says. That's quoted there. Josephus, historian Josephus, quotes Berosus from the 4th century BC, and it talks about an illness coming on the king. It's Nebuchadnezzar, but not spelled right, which is not shocking, right? Because, again, the original Semitic languages didn't have vowels, and so they were inserted. So you can see where things would be, spellings could be a little bit tricky. And so he said there was an illness that came on this king, which looks like Nebuchadnezzar, but it could be Nabonidus, but it talks about then he died after reigning 43 years, which could only mean Nebuchadnezzar. So all that to say, when you read your study Bibles and you read your commentaries, depending on which side they take it, they're going to give more weight to one side or the other. The bottom line is this. We do not have information extra-biblical to discredit Daniel chapter 4 in the form in which we had. We have evidence on one hand that makes it make more sense and it's more truthful, but again, depending on which slant your commentator or your biblical study notes take, you may see it a little differently. So I wanted you to tell that, but nothing has discredited Daniel chapter 4 from actually happening to King Nebuchadnezzar. So the form in which we have it in is the form in which we're going to study. And the form in which we have it in is written by a very skilled writer. All right, this is a very skilled writer. It's not hard for us to think about a leader having someone help them craft an address to empire, to a nation, right? The State of the Union address was not written by the president ever, right? He has influence, but they have a slew of writers that are going to help them, right? Same thing, we can see that happening here in Nebuchadnezzar. While he's speaking in the first person, we know that this is a skilled writer. Could Nebuchadnezzar have been that skilled? Possibly, but probably not. But also, it's a very poetic book. In the Semitic language of Aramaic, very poetic. Some of the English language translations pick that poetry up, some don't. It's just hard to translate poetry in different languages. It's hard to keep that rhythm and rhyme that you can get in one language and translate it into another. But this is a very skilled writer and a very poetic writer. And I say that because in the midst of this chapter, there's a switch. It switches from first person to third person. All right? We're going to begin, he's like, I, Nebuchadnezzar, right? And then he's going to switch to talk, the dress is going to switch to the third person, and then it's going to switch back to the first person again. And the question's always been for commentators, is this intentional for the original writing, or is this editing that was put in for the compilation? So let's look at this. As this narrative unfolds, we begin with an opening address and praise, the first 3 verses. And after that, Nebuchadnezzar describes his distress that he's having. Then he describes the dream that he has. And then, in this right here, is where it switches. So it's been in the first person, now it switches to the third person. Daniel interprets the dream here, and the dream is fulfilled. During this time, you'll see in the text, it's written in the third person. It's not I, it is the king, it is Daniel. It's written in the third person here. But then, Nebuchadnezzar describes his restoration back in the first person. He describes his successes in the first person again, and he ends with a closing praise in the first person. So the question is, is it an intentional switch, or was that center section added? If the center section is added, then it means that in the original address that Nebuchadnezzar is crafting for the Babylonian Empire, right, then there's an information gap there. Because he describes his dream, he says, Daniel, interpret the dream, and if this is an add-on later, then it's as if Daniel gives no information at all. And then Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, but then my reason returns to me. And so, seems awkward, right? Knowing that this is written by a skilled author, it makes more sense that this is intentional. And it's done to amplify what's actually taking place. Nebuchadnezzar is explaining what's going on in the address. He said, I was healthy, everything was going good, I had this dream, and then what happens? The dream is fulfilled, and I lose my reason. And the whole time he's now lost his reason, it's written in the third person. So that when his reason returns, now it is, I, Nebuchadnezzar, again. So now what he is, think about this address. You're Nebuchadnezzar. You come back into power after 7 years of having lost your mind, and this is your address to the nation, right? I was healthy, I was not, and what do you want them to know? I am healthy again. And think about now how this amplifies that. I, then this happens to me. And I am not even well enough to tell it. Somebody else tells it. But now I am restored, and I can tell you, my success is, not only am I restored, I'm better than ever, right? I'm back, right? So even this is why we say it's a very skilled author. Even in the structure of this address, he is getting his point across. I was great, I was not good, but I'm great again. You can trust me as we move forward. And so I look at this as very intentional, not an add-on. It makes no sense to be an edited add-on. His address would then just leave a complete blank, and it would go from, Daniel, tell me the dream, to, hey, I'm better, with not even knowing what happened in between. So this seems to be an intentional amplification of the point he's trying to get across. There is one more literary issue we have to discuss, and that's talking about verses 1 through 3. In the Jewish Masoretic text, even to today, if you're looking at the true Jewish, complete biblical Old Testament, even in that writing today, verses 1 through 3 of chapter 4 is actually applied at the end of chapter 3. So it's verses 31, 32, and 33 of chapter 3, not chapter 4. Now, somebody asked me a couple weeks back, I can't remember who, so I apologize. Somebody said, well, how did he do this without getting burned? How did King Nebuchadnezzar not get burned, right? All the people got burned, and he got close enough to look in. How did he not get burned? Well, if this part is added to the first part of chapter 4 is added to the end of chapter 1, he tells you, saying, hey, God protected me. This is the wonders that he did towards me. He kept me from being burned up in the midst of this. Not only did he deliver the people, but he delivered me. That's the way commentators will take it if it's at the end of chapter 3. Now, I think most people, as they move forward, say that no, this belongs in chapter 4. It sounds more like an address, a beginning of an address, than it does an ending to a story. So we're going to study it as the beginning, as the opening of an address. And here's what it says. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that live throughout the earth, may you have abundant prosperity. The signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me, I am pleased to recount. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his sovereignty is from generation to generation. All right, so this sounds like an opening address, an opening letter. You have who's it from? King Nebuchadnezzar. Who's it to? All the people of the world, right? Because I'm the ruler of the whole world. To all peoples and all languages. And let me give you a blessing, right? You know, all the letters that we talked about have had a blessing to it, and here's one that is pretty common. May you have abundant prosperity. It's pretty common all throughout iniquity. And then he gives the reason. Why am I addressing you? Because I am pleased to recount the signs that the Most High God has done towards me. His signs are great, his mighty wonders. His kingdom is from everlasting to everlasting. His sovereignty is from generation to generation. So, right up front, at the very beginning of his address, he is showing us why these signs were and wonders were done towards him by the God Most High. To show Nebuchadnezzar that the God's kingdom is from everlasting to everlasting, and his sovereignty is from generation to generation. So he's an everlasting kingdom and sovereign from generation to generation. So that's the point that Nebuchadnezzar is trying to get across in this address. Now, I'm going to let you judge whether he actually gets it across or not when we get to the end, but that's what he says his points are. So then we go into, he begins to describe his distress. He says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living at ease in my home and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that frightened me. My fantasies in bed and the visions of my head terrified me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me in order that they might tell me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the diviners came in, and I told them the dream, but they could not tell me its interpretation. At last, Daniel came in before me. He who was named Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and who is endowed with the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream. And so here in this section, we have Nebuchadnezzar describing his distress. Right? And the reason for his distress is this. At the very point of his empire, when things should be going perfect for him, when he should be at the most peace, he's discontent. Not only is he discontent, he's terrified. He's frightened. He lays down in bed, and these dreams and visions come to him, and he's terrified. And so what's King Nebuchadnezzar do? As always, let's make a decree, right? He's big on decrees that have no authority whatsoever, if you've noticed. So his decree is, hey, bring all the wise people in, and they're going to interpret a dream for me. And guess what? He's disappointed in that group again, right? I mean, don't you love it? By this time, why waste your time with this group, right? I mean, they've never done anything good for you, but he calls them in, and he acts almost disappointed, like they couldn't do it for him, like that was surprising. But then he calls Daniel in. And what I hope you heard just a little bit of it is almost like the relief that he has when Daniel comes in. Like, I am distressed, I'm distraught, I'm terrified, I'm frightened. Nobody can give me answers, but when Daniel comes in, at last, he's here. The one who is has the spirit of the gods, right? Now, he says in this text, it says the spirit of the holy gods. That's not Elohim, this is a plural form of it. It's holy gods. This phrase kind of means he has a divine spirit within him, right? He's not claiming that he has the spirit of Yahweh in him. This is not a recognition by Nebuchadnezzar that Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has empowered Daniel. That's not the vision right here. He's saying he has some divine spirit that can tell me dreams, right? And I want you to also notice how he calls Daniel. He says his name is Belteshazzar. He's named after what? My God. All right? Now, this whole time we've been talking about Nebuchadnezzar. We've talked about the Bible speaking about Nebuchadnezzar being God's servant. I call my servant Nebuchadnezzar up. The whole time, right? Different prophets have said it. We pointed it out. And yet, what do we see right here? Belteshazzar. He's named after my God. My God is Baal. So how do we make those two jive? God says that Nebuchadnezzar is my servant. Nebuchadnezzar says Baal is my God. How does that jive? Well, here's what we can say is Nebuchadnezzar is the unknowing servant of God. Right? He's serving God's purpose, and he doesn't even know it. Right? God is shaping history in his hand of providence using Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, it's not like Nebuchadnezzar's coming and saying, look, God told me to come here. I'm doing this for God. No, he's doing this. I'm doing this because I want to. And God says, no. You're doing it because you're serving my purpose. You see how the hand of providence is working there? You're serving my purpose there. And so Nebuchadnezzar is the unknowing servant of God. But what's he say? My God is Baal. All right, so then he goes and Nebuchadnezzar would describe the dream. O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods, and that no mystery is too difficult for you. Now remember, what did Daniel say last time he interpreted a dream? I'm interpreting a dream out of no power of my own, no wisdom of my own. Only God can do this. Even the people he's been disappointed in, the Chaldeans, the magicians, the sorcerers, and all those, they said, look, only God can reveal these dreams. And Daniel says, they're right. Only God can do it, but God has allowed me to show you the interpretation so you will know. But here, Nebuchadnezzar says, I know that no mystery is too difficult for you. So hear the dream that I saw and tell me its interpretation. Upon my bed, this is what I saw. There was a tree at the center of the earth. Its height was great. The tree grew great and strong. Its top reached to the heaven, and it was visible to the ends of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, its fruit abundant, and it provided food for all. The animals of the fields found shade under it. The birds of the air nested in its branches, and from it all living beings were fed. That sounds pretty good. It's a good dream. But wait. I continued looking in the visions of my head as I lay in my bed, and there was a holy watcher coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said, cut down the tree and chop off its branches, strip off its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from beneath it and the birds from its branches, but leave its stump and its roots in the ground with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let him, wait a minute, let me back up just a minute. Cut down the tree, chop off its branches, let the animals flee from beneath it, let the birds from its branches, but leave its stump and the roots in the ground with the band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field, right? The watcher's talking about the tree, right? It. And this is Nebuchadnezzar saying what he's heard in the dream. Then listen to the switch. The watcher's still speaking. He says, let him be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field, in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a human, and let the mind of an animal be given to him, and let 7 times pass over him. The sentence is rendered by decree of the watchers. The decision is given by the order of the holy ones, in order that all who live may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of mortals. He gives it to whom he will, and sets it over the lowliest of human beings. This is a dream that I, Nebuchadnezzar, saw. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are unable to tell me the interpretation. You are able, however, for you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods. And so Nebuchadnezzar is describing his dream. And first there's this tree, right? And this tree is just described as beautiful, abundant, tall. Now we can't help, as Christians in the Jewish mindset, an audience couldn't help but hear, it reaches where? To the heavens. Now, the last time we heard about something reaching to the heavens on the land of Shinar, it wasn't a good thing, right? And so we hear that, we hear the Tower of Babel echoes in the back of us, right? And so it's this beautiful tree, and it's providing abundance, and the animals are coming under it. And then this watcher comes down, and the watcher we can say is an angelic being. I'm just going to read what Sharon Pace, little note that she has on this. I think she does a good job on it. Concerning what watchers or what it's meant, it says, in the Second Temple period, watcher was a term used to refer either to angels or to the fallen angels. In 1 Enoch, the biblical account of the sons of God who went into the daughters of men, Genesis 6, is interpreted as referring to the acts of the fallen watchers with women, unions that gave humanity a frightful legacy. These offsprings of giants of the antediluvian age bring forbidden knowledge, evil, and violence into the world. They are held accountable by God and eternally punished. Watchers, however, were also portrayed as fulfilling God's purposes and are called the angels of the Lord in Jubilees 4:15. According to Jubilees, before they were corrupted, they had been known as those who descended on the earth, those who are named the watchers, that they should instruct the children of men, then that they should do judgment and uprightness upon the earth. In the book of Daniel, the watchers are equated with the holy ones and are portrayed only as faithful messengers of God, similar to the description of the archangels in 1 Enoch, who are identified as the holy angels who watch. And so around the same time that this stories are all being compiled into the book of Daniel that we have, the scroll of Daniel that we have now, the idea of holy watchers is similar to the archangel idea in 1 Enoch. And is often described as maybe an empire's angel or a nation's angel who is watching over that nation, who will speak judgment on behalf of God. So it's the watchers are always plural. So it's almost like God's court, and then they will take the messengers out, which would be a very vivid image for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is not going out to all the provinces and making his decrees known. His court is going out for him, so this would be a very powerful image for him. The God on high has sent his court, the holy watchers from his court, to declare this, and it's frightening to him. The tree had to be beautiful, and then to hear this command and decree coming from the watcher terrified him, and had to terrify him more when he switched and stopped talking about the tree and started talking about it in a person's sense. It had to terrify him. And yet, I have a hard time believing that he doesn't have an inkling of what maybe he's supposed to take from this, right? I mean, you have a hard time that he's already had one dream. It was this large statue, and he's like, hey, you're the statue. You're the head of it, and this is what it is. I have a hard time for him thinking that he doesn't have at least an inkling of this. And I think we get that when he says to Daniel, Daniel, you interpret the dream. And when Daniel interprets the dream, first thing we hear is Daniel is severely distressed upon hearing it. Why is he distressed, do you think? Because Daniel knows right away what he's supposed to say. And what he's supposed to say is not very good. And he's going to have to say that to King Nebuchadnezzar. And remember what King Nebuchadnezzar just did in the last chapter. He just had throwing people in the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar's not that stable of a guy. I mean, he's not that nice of a guy, right? I mean, he's a ruler, and he's ruling for himself. And now Daniel knows, I'm going to have to say this to King Nebuchadnezzar. It makes me also wonder, did any of the other ones of that other group have an inkling and like, yeah, I'm not going to go there. I'd rather him just think I'm an idiot than have to actually tell him what this dream actually means. But Daniel doesn't. The thoughts terrify him. He's completely distressed. But the king then says, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or the interpretation terrify you. And so Daniel starts, and I believe this is couched in language to make it eased in just a little bit. What's he saying? My Lord, may the dream be for those who hate you and its interpretation for your enemies. Right? That's how he starts, right? Like Daniel's been around the court for a while now. Right? And he's just not, let me just ease into this just a bit. But then he goes on and he says, hey, he gives the interpretation. He said, he gives the good. He said, hey, here's the good thing. You're the tree. You've grown powerful. All over the world, your name is known. Your sovereignty reaches to the heavens. And then he gives him the bad. He says, the bad is, you're the tree who's reaching to the heavens. And now you're being cut down. You're being cut down. Because of your pride, because of your arrogance, you're being cut down. The kingdom is scattered. It's going to be scattered from you. Now, the band placed around the stump means that it's going to be restored to you after a time, but it's not going to be a good time. And he ends the interpretation by saying this. Therefore, O king, may my counsel be acceptable to you. Atone for your sins with righteousness, and your iniquities with mercy to the oppressed, so that your prosperity may be prolonged. All right, so he gives him this dream, and he says, but king, let my counsel come to you. Like, atone for those sins that you're doing with righteousness. And with mercy for the oppressed. So what does that tell you Nebuchadnezzar's rule has been like? Like, he says atone for righteousness. Righteousness is this idea of justice. Like, there's no justice, like, it's only for him, right? There's no equity, there's no righteousness whatsoever. And there's no mercy for those who are oppressed. And King Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful person. And so who's doing the oppressing? Right? And so it's just called a maybe, just maybe. If you repent, if you turn from this, if you atone for what you've been doing and change your leaf, maybe this won't happen. Right? This is his plea. But Nebuchadnezzar, as we know, doesn't listen. And it begins, all this came upon, this is verse 28, all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king said, is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal capital by my mighty power and for my glorious majesty? While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, the kingdom has departed from you. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the animals of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals and gives it to whom he will. Immediately, the sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society, ate grass like the oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of the heavens until his hair grew as long as an eagle's feathers and his nails became like birds' claws. All right. So in this we see that 12 months pass. Why 12 months? Right? Maybe it's an opportunity to repent, to turn from it, right? Maybe that's what it was. Maybe this is the Nineveh moment, the Jonah-Nineveh moment, right? But unlike Nineveh, Jonah gave a day. Hey, what did he say? Here in a few days it's going to be overturned, right? And so but here, when Daniel interprets a dream, there's no time frame given of when it's going to happen. Right? It's just that it's going to happen. And I think that's important. We'll talk about that just in a second, of why I think that's important. But then when 12 months has passed, here he is up on the king's roof. And here's what Mama would say to me. Stay off the king's roof. If you read the Old Testament, nothing good happens on the king's roof. I mean, the last king that was up on the roof when things were going well, it was David. He looked over and things didn't go well for him after that, did they? Stay off the roof. Right? That's what Mama would say to me. But he's on the roof, and his situation is he's looking over, look at my glory. Look what I have done. It's a pride thing, right? David's was a pride thing. True, the root of David's sin was pride, right? I can have anything I want. Look who I am. Same thing here. It's pride, right? And all of a sudden, the voice from heaven comes down. And here's what we say. When the voice of heaven declares it, what happens? It happens immediately. You see, when God gave him the dream, gave him the warning, this is going to happen, didn't list out a time frame, right? Because God shows things in advance. That's what we're seeing. God is revealing things in advance in the book of Daniel. But when it happens, when it's time, it's time. It happens immediately, right? There is no grace period on the roof. He's on the roof. I revealed it ahead of time. When time came to its fullness, whatever God had declared took place immediately, right? And here's why I think that's so important. Remember the original audience, all right? The original audience, either those who are in exile who are learning this while it's happening, or those who are returned from exile, but the kingdom is not restored, right? They have the visions and promises of God, don't they? They do. They have the visions, right? Daniel in a few chapters be like, hey, I look back and Jeremiah says it's going to be 70 years and we're about that point, God. Right? They have the visions, they have the dreams, they have the promises, but they don't always have the time frame, do they? Think about those who return to exile. They've been promised a restoration of their kingdom. They've been promised a Messiah. But it's not happening. Think about 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st century BC. Think about the time when God, that silent period in the Testaments, when God is silent. The book of Daniel says, hey, the promises that were made, as soon as the time would come, when the fullness of time comes, that's the New Testament language, the fullness of time comes, it happens. Right? Think about the encouragement that gives those who are in the waiting. Right? In the fullness of time, it comes. And when it comes, nothing stops it. It happens. Right? And so the other question, this part of the text is, why this punishment? I mean, God could have done anything to Nebuchadnezzar. Why do you think he turned him into a beast of the field? It's hard to think, but God could have done anything, and there's a reason for this. And perhaps we start to see this in the book of Daniel starting here. Starting here, and in the next 2 chapters, we start seeing beasts really showing up. There's something beastly about this coming through here, right? You have the Nebuchadnezzar turning into a beast. You have Daniel being thrown into the lion's den, the beast's den. Then you have Daniel having the dream, and the countries and the nations and empires are envisioned as these strange beasts, right? Things become very beastly here. If you remember back in Genesis, humanity was created to what? Have dominion over the earth and over the beasts of the field, right? But not over each other. Think about what that dream that Nebuchadnezzar just had, the tree, right? It didn't say people were gathered on it. It's like the beasts of the field, right? The oxen were gathered up under it. He had been having dominion over people, right? And when we get out of God's path, God's design, we stop acting human as we were created to be, and we start acting beastly, don't we? Right? Think about David. David wasn't acting like a human in God's image. He was thinking in his beastly attitude, right? Think about Nebuchadnezzar, right? He wasn't being human in the image of God. It was all about me. It was a survival of the fittest. I am the lion head of the herd, right? When we begin to get out of the line, we begin to become what we were supposed to have dominion over. And that plays right into the next chapter when Daniel's thrown in the lion's den. Daniel's doing what he's supposed to do, right? And God gives him dominion over the lions. The lions do not open their mouth while he's in there. Right? And so this is what we see. The nations of the world falling, human empires, because they're not reflecting the image of God. They're acting beastly, right? And so this is, again, do I know that 100% sure? No, but it sure begins to feed into, make sense for things that will come before and after. All right, so after this time, though, 7 times passed. And again, a lot of translations may even say 7 years, but the Aramaic says 7 times. Of course, in Hebrew and Aramaic, 7 is the perfect number. So could it have been 7 years? Yes. But whatever amount of time it was the perfect amount of time as required. Like it is God's timing, right? When this time passed, then he is restored. And here's what Nebuchadnezzar says about that. When that period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. I blessed the Most High and praised and honored the one who lives forever, for his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, "What are you doing?" All right? So, when the period was over, he says, I lift my eyes, reason returned, and what he does do with that? He blessed the God of Most High. Okay. All right, so very simple, right? He was brought low, and now he's lifted up. And so then it goes on at the end, last verse 36. He says, at that time my reason returned to me, my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. My counselors and my Lord sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, King Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are truth, his ways are justice, and he is able to bring low those who walk in pride. So his success is that my reason returned, my majesty and splendor returned, my counselors returned, my kingdom is reestablished, and I'm better than ever. And then he praises God with those words. Right? So now here's the question. When we look at this, is this Nebuchadnezzar's conversion, or is this Nebuchadnezzar's defeat? Right? Let's think about this. Is it a conversion or defeat? Because a lot of times we jump right to our language that we have in New Testament language, and we say, this is what it is, and this is a conversion. Well, what was the reason Nebuchadnezzar's reason returned to him? What was the reason? Because the period was over. The period was over. I lift my eyes, my reason returned, right? A lot of times what we want to do in our thing is like, wait a minute, he lifted his eyes, he looked, he praised, wait a minute. The time was over. The only reason he could lift his eyes, I got a feeling that wasn't the only time he looked up in the sky the whole time while he was under, right? Like the dew was falling on him and he's like, what's that? Right? He looked up, right? But his reason returned to him when the time was over, right? His time was done. Punishment has been served. Now he's able to look up and see. And when he sees, his reason returns. And what does he see? God is more powerful than me. No one can stay his hand. I was prideful, he brought me low. Right? That's what we see. Is that a conversion or a defeat? I don't know. But here's a question I ask. Do we see any change in him? Right? Listen to that again when he describes his success. At that time, my reason returned to me. My majesty and splendor were restored to me. The glory of my kingdom, my counselors, my Lord sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. One verse I counted 7 times when he says, my. And if I was just humbled because of pride, I probably could have found a way to word that a little differently. Right? And so here's the point. We don't know if it was a conversion or not. We know he now acknowledges that God is greater than him. Here's what Nebuchadnezzar has done. He went from being an unknown servant of God, an unknowing servant of God, not unknown, unknowing servant of God, serving the purposes of God without even knowing it, to knowing a God who reveals the human history, who can deliver his people, and who has more authority over all kings, because he's the highest king and can bring low anyone he wants. That's what we know King Nebuchadnezzar knows about God. That's all we know. All right? If we jump to the question of, is Nebuchadnezzar converted or is it defeat? That's the question we always jump to, but if we do that, then we're missing the point. Nebuchadnezzar is not the point. God's revelation is the point, right? God's revelation of who he is, not just to Nebuchadnezzar, but to his people and to the people of the world. Everybody in the world under his empire who hears this decree knows this. There is a God who is greater than Nebuchadnezzar. And in that day and age, who was Nebuchadnezzar's God? Baal. And Baal was supposedly the greatest because his empire had defeated everyone. What everyone in that empire knows is that there is a God who controls all of this. It's over Baal and over Nebuchadnezzar. That's what the point of this passage is. So what does this teach us about God? First off, what does it say? God is sovereign over all. We're getting that one. And he reigns over all kings and kingdoms. Right? Over all kings and kingdoms. God's decrees and time periods are fulfilled according to his desires. God is patient, merciful, and righteous towards humanity. Not just towards Israelites or Jewish people, towards humanity. Think about this. The same way that he punished David, but David still restored his kingdom, he punishes Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar still restores his kingdom, right? Still there's problems, but also, and think about Nebuchadnezzar changing. There's a Jewish tradition. It's in the, I think it's the Midrash, that says that when he was restored to his kingdom and his reason restored, and he restored the power, he jailed his son, who is taking the power in his place during that time. So much so that when he actually dies after 43 years of reigning, the son won't take the throne until he sees Nebuchadnezzar's body dragged through the streets. Because I ain't going through this again. Right? So did he change? Probably not so much, right? If he would have changed, we would have seen a drastic change in the way he was treating God's people for sure, right? So, but God is patient, merciful, and righteous towards humanity. And God reveals himself to people in many and various ways. And that's important for us today to think. In the Iranian church, in the Middle Eastern churches, underground churches, visions and dreams are common. Right? We don't see that very much in our culture. Some, yes, but not. If someone came and said, hey, I had a dream, some about, did you really? They'd probably be like, well, what'd you eat last night, right? That would have been our first question. Like, what did you eat last night? But in other cultures, with dreams and visions are normal, God reaches out, and still today, people are having visions of Jesus in powerful ways. And so we don't discount the number of ways God reveals himself. Just because God revealed himself to you in one way doesn't mean that is the way and only way he does. I think it's important for us to remember. What does this teach us about humanity? A lot, but the sin of pride is the inherited danger to humanity. We inherited it from our first ancestors, Adam and Eve, and it's been passed down ever since. It manifests itself in many different ways, but it is the sin of pride is an inherited danger to all of humanity. And at our highest moments, that was when we're most acceptable. Right? Remember what my mama said, stay off the king's roof. Right? When things are going good, make sure we praise. It's easy to turn to God when we're down. When we think about Nebuchadnezzar. When he was down, it was easy for him to look up. There's no other place to look but up when you're down. But when you feel on top of it, that's when... What was he doing? He was on the roof, and where was he looking? Down at everything he had created. Everything he had made. Felt like he was on top. Stay off the king's roof, right? That's where the sin of pride can get us in all different areas. All right, what's the intended message to the original audience? First, God is in control. God's decrees and timings are faithful and true. Right? The original audiences have been extremely important as they're waiting in exile or waiting for fulfillments of promises. God is both merciful and just. They have been those in the Babylonian Empire, or no mercy and there was no justice, no righteousness, right? But God is both of those. How does this point us to Christ? This is a little bit more difficult in this passage. First off, Nebuchadnezzar is the antithesis to King Jesus, right? Like he is just the opposite. Nebuchadnezzar had to be brought low in order for him to give glory to God. Jesus made himself low to glory of God, right? I mean, there's so many different things you can point to what Nebuchadnezzar is doing, and it's just opposite of what the true King Jesus is. The other thing, and I didn't put it slide up here, think about the tree, right? It grew huge, right? Nebuchadnezzar felt himself the big man, like my name is known as this tree, and everything comes and is nourished by it. Jesus talks about a tree like that in the New Testament. What is a tree that's grown from the smallest thing? The mustard seed. And the animals and the birds of the field come and find shelter there, right? Right? So think about what it said, that God has authority and is sovereign over it, and he gives it to the lowliest. Right? Think about that, the lowliest. And that mustard seed was what? It's given to it by faith. Think about that, the smallest seed, biggest kingdom, right? So there's a way to get to Christ from this passage. And so what are we to take from this? First off, the assurance that we take from this is that God's word endures forever. His promises and decrees will come to their completion in his perfect timing. There's a passage in the book of Philippians that says, he will bring to completion that work which he began in you. Man, I cling to that more and more every day. In his perfect time, and that will be brought to completion. I cling to that, but his word and his promises endure forever. The challenge is to remember that I am not the center of God's story, and yet his eye is always on me. Right? We like the second part of that in our culture today. We love the idea that God is always focused on us. Like his eyes on the sparrow. Yes, I'm a sparrow. Your eyes on me. We love that. But in the midst of loving that, we make ourselves the center of the story. Right? Think about this. Nebuchadnezzar was not the center of the story. He was used by God as an unknowing servant of God. And at the same time, Israel was sent into, or Judah was sent into exile. Daniel, God's people, was sent and became a blessing to Nebuchadnezzar to reveal to him who God is. And then Nebuchadnezzar acts in a way that is prideful, but unknowingly now the whole empire knows that there's a God that's greater than his God. God's story is so complex. You don't know what part you're playing in at any given time. You're going through something tough, you don't know who that might be a message to by the way the peace you have in the midst of it, the joy you have in the midst of it, right? You don't know who your joy is going to inspire when you're going through it. You're not the center of the story. God is the center of the story. We're all just stages. I mean, we're just on a stage used as many times as his unknowing servants in the lives of others, right? Think about this. God's exile of his people made his name known throughout all the Babylonian Empire, from the greatest, most powerful king of the time. Who could have wrote that story? And then if we pass forward, the wise men who are terrible, can't ever get anything right, wise men from this area show up to give gifts to baby Jesus when he's born. Who can write this story? What God is writing, we cannot comprehend just the smallest bit of it. That's what's important for us to know, that his eyes are on us, yes, but we're not the center of the story. Question for all of us to ponder: where does the sin of pride have its strongest hold on us? We should always ask that. And finally, gratitude for the unknown servants of God who have been used by God to bring me into a deeper knowledge of him. All right, think about not just how God uses me or you as an unknowing servant in his plan for somebody else, but think about all the other people that God has used for you, and make sure we lift up thanksgiving for that. All right, well, we're going to come to an end, but we're going to do a little something different.